Are you a scaling SaaS founder?
Ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those you don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Bula, and welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where software releases are never late, they're just on island time. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. Help B2B SaaS founders like you grow from traction to scale. Here, growth is more than just numbers. It's about crafting a future-proof company, premium valuation, and leaders who build a business of significance while living epic, adventurous lives. How about here? Did you know that the success of scaling companies often depends not just on great leadership, but also on great followership? What if your key to exponential growth was your team combined with a concept from a small village in the South Pacific? This week I'm in Fiji, hanging out with some amazing founders and business leaders. We're working on our businesses and having some fun too. You can see over my shoulder here, right over the side, we've got Survivor Island, which is just off this island here. Kind of an amazing experience, kind of surreal. This week we're exploring how active followership can transform your leadership approach and drive business growth, and drawing inspiration from the Fijian concept of sole sole vaki. So working together for a common cause literally means above the reef or beyond the reef. There are a handful of leadership styles and models of leadership, like old school models where leaders direct and followers just execute, and it's pretty outdated, except maybe in cases where if orders aren't followed, people die, then maybe it makes sense. I actually thought it was a relic in business, but it's alive and well in many large corporations. But as companies scale, leaders often face the challenge of maintaining cohesion, innovation, and adaptability within their teams. However, when team members are passive or disengaged, even the most visionary leader can struggle to steer the company towards success. The question is, how can leaders foster an environment where everyone actively contributes to the company's growth? This concept is alive and well here in the islands, much like the collective effort seen in Fijian villages. So let's explore how the principles of active followership we see modeled in Fijian culture can revolutionize leadership in scaling your B2B SaaS company. The first one is a concept called sole sole vaki, and it's collective responsibility. In Fijian culture, sole sole vaki is the practice of coming together to work toward a common goal. And in a business context, this translates to creating a culture where every team member feels responsible for the success of the company. It's theirs, they own it. They feel like it's on them. And leaders should encourage this collective responsibility by involving everyone in decision-making processes and recognizing the value of each role within the organization. One of the best companies that I ever was involved with, every single person felt like their own mini CEO of their role, their department, their function. Number two is leadership through influence and respect. Fijian chiefs lead by earning the respect of their people, not by exerting authoritarian control. Similarly, modern business leaders should focus on leading through influence, trust, and respect. By empowering their teams and fostering a collaborative environment, leaders can inspire followers to take initiative and contribute meaningfully, which is crucial, especially as companies start to scale, because we need that. We can't do it all ourselves. And number three is adapting through collective action. Fijian communities are known for their ability to adapt to challenges. Think about this. You're an island in the middle of the Pacific, far away from everywhere else. You better figure out how to adapt and thrive. But typhoons, what we think of in the US as hurricanes, come through on a regular basis, like 3 or 4 a year, big ones. Lack of resources, supply chain interruptions, and tourism. Think about that, 60% of the economy shut down for 2 years. How do you adapt? How do you survive that? How do you move through it? And it's collective action. In the business world, this means encouraging teams to innovate and solve problems together. You don't have a problem, I don't have a problem, we do. And it's up to us to find a solution. So in a company, it's not us versus them. It's not, that other department over there has a problem and we're awesome. No, we all have a problem. It's all working together for the good of the business and coming up with solutions, not pointing fingers. Yeah, I love that. Just that it's up to us to find that solution. And that's where teams are truly aligned and incredibly powerful. One cohesive unit. Think about, one body. I love that example. We're all part of one body. You stub your toe, the entire body reacts, right? It's not the toe's problem. It's like, oh, toe, it's all on you to fix this. No, the whole body reacts. And same thing here. When followers are empowered to take ownership of challenges and contribute solutions, companies can adapt more effectively to market changes and growth challenges. So to wrap things up, followership, the followership revolution. We'll be talking about that today. Redefines leadership by emphasizing the importance of active followership in scaling companies. Drawing inspiration from Pajin culture, collective responsibility, leadership through respect, and adapting through collective action, you can foster a powerful collaborative environment that drives sustainable growth in your company. Our expert guest last week was Richard Harris, expert in go-to-market and sales. We talked about resilience in the sales process, the right go-to-market motion, and how to ask the right questions at the right time. And our founder last Tuesday was Sean Malone, founder of FlowChat. 8-time founder, amazingly successful, ups, downs, great story, absolute straight up story of founder life, the good, the bad, the ugly, and they're really awesome. And Sean is such a great dude also. If you missed either one of those episodes, go back and give them a listen. My guest today is Dr. Paul Ashley, CTO of Anonyome Labs, a company dedicated to empowering users with the tools to maintain safety, privacy, and control in both their online and offline interactions. With over 30 years experience in software product development and a deep focus on security and privacy, Paul leads the charge in product innovation and emerging technologies. Welcome a true expert in the field of digital privacy, Paul Ashley. Hey, Paul, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Tell me about the journey of Anonyome Labs into decentralized identity, and what inspired you to develop the pseudo platform?
Yeah, okay. So we're actually at the about the 10-year end of the 10-year journey. So we've been going for about 10 years, and the reason it's called Anonyome Labs is it's about anonymous me. It's about what we've always tried to do is provide privacy and security protection for users that are online. We all live our lives online, but we all know that there's this digital trail being created about us, that there's these big data brokers that are collecting all of our data. And so the company was really founded to try to address that problem by providing tools for end users. And so there has been a journey to where we are here. So, we started with building a few, mobile apps, getting those out into the market. Then we had enterprises start to talk to us about, could we build a platform that we could provide those sort of services for their applications, for their users. And through that journey, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, we started to see a lot of engagement around this technology called decentralized identity. And I could explain the history of where that came from, but we came from it from a point of view of privacy and security.
And so privacy and security of the individual, or protecting data, or tell me about that.
So let's it's mainly the end user that we try to look after. So this is the average person who's online trying to do their online life, and more of our life is online. So let me go through the history of where it really came from. So if we go back to the 90s, so my background, I've been in the identity space for about 30 years now. And if I can remember back to the 90s, and there was just this identity, and they call it identity and access management, that was called centralized. And what it meant, and we're all very familiar with this, is when you go up to use a service, let's say you want to use Uber, well, you go and create an account on that service. So you create a username, password. Sure. They may ask you for a 2-factor, and they'll ask you for a bunch of personal information, right? It could be mobile phone number, could be credit card information, it could be anything. And at the same time, they're collecting that about you. That centralized model is still probably the dominant model out there, but what it means for you and I is that all of our personal data is really distributed across the internet in all these different places. And if I look in my password manager, there's over 200 accounts in there, and I think, well, I've got personal data in 200 different places across the internet. So it's no wonder that there's headlines every week that all that data is ending up in the dark web, it's being sold, it's being misused, because there's 200 different ways just my data can get get abused. And,
Right.
and so that's the kind of the centralized model. And we're all used to it. And we really, it's really has been a big failure because, not only does it use passwords that are, easy to break, but it's putting us in a position where we're all vulnerable for people to use our personal data inappropriately. But then when we got into the 2000s, the system, they tried to come up with a new system and they called it federated identity and access management, or what you would call social login. And in this is where you see those buttons that says log in with Google or log in with Facebook or log in with Twitter. What they were trying to do there is simplify it for the user. So rather than you having, 50 different passwords, why don't you just have an account on Google and use that to sign into this, to Uber or whatever the account might be? And, more convenience for the user, but from a privacy point of view, it was actually much worse because what really happens is that identity provider, say Google, and that service behind the scenes exchange personal data about you. So the service you're going to is obviously getting information about you. That identity providers also got information and they can share that and they really don't ask your permission to do that. So the federated model, although it's more convenient for the user, is really much more sort of privacy invasive. And all of that leads up to this new terminology, and we're starting to see it everywhere. And it's called decentralized identity, or some people call it digital credentials or verifiable credentials or reusable credentials. There's different names you hear for it, but essentially it's trying to change the paradigm to be much more secure and private. And I would say it probably started 5 to 7 years ago, but in the last year or two it's got a lot of momentum. And I'll talk about how it works. The fundamental difference is that you get an identity wallet, right? So at the moment, you don't really have we do see wallets like Apple Wallet, Google Wallet, but it's, maybe I'll put my boarding pass in there or my gym membership, but it's not a very functional wallet. Identity wallets are much more functional. And the idea is your identities, and what they mean by identities is things like cryptographic keys. They're thinking these terms called verifiable credentials. All sorts of information about you live in your wallet. So this is a new concept, and what the concept is about is that you own and control your identity, rather than your identity really being these accounts across the internet. You own your identity, and you do these connections to these different accounts, and you really control what personal data you give them. So it is a really new paradigm, and it's based around this technology that they call verifiable credentials, or some people will say digital credentials or reusable credentials. And what it is, and let's take the mobile driver's license. So by the end of this year, around 20 states in the US will have digital driver's license that are based on decentralized identity technology. It's called MDL, or mobile driver's license. And the idea is, rather than giving you a plastic card or as well as giving you a plastic card, they give you a wallet, and inside that wallet they put an electronic version of your driver's license. And what the big advantage of that is it gives you more privacy protection. So you're going up to a website, let's say you're trying to buy alcohol online, right, is you can present your age to that organization, to that shop, but you don't have to provide all the other information on your driver's license. Or even if you're turning up in person, let's say you're turning up at a bar, they want to prove you're over 21, you present your electronic driver's license, but again, you can just go, I'm going to prove to you I'm over 21, but I don't have to give you, the fact that I wear glasses, that that this is my home address, and that and whatever other restrictions are on there. There's 20 odd fields on a driver's license. You don't want to give all those up just when you're turning up to a bar. And I have this happen to me all the time. I visit Salt Lake City quite a lot. They always ask me for identification. As soon as I hand that over, I realize that I've given a whole lot of information to them. So this is again why decentralized identity is about reducing that amount of personal data, because what they really want to know is that the person standing in front of them is over 21. That's all they need to know. They don't need to know your birth date. They don't need to know your home address and all those things. So the mobile driver's license is just one example, but what we're starting to see, and why I think this is a really important topic for your listeners, is we're starting to see it across a whole lot of industries. In the travel industry, there's a lot of talk about replacing passports with visas and vaccine certificates and all those kind of things that you would have when you travel with just electronic versions. And we're seeing it in regulated industries, things like farming and mining and those sort of things. So I guess the reason I want to talk about this with your listeners is we're all going to see it over the next year. People, you're going to turn up to renew your driver's license, and the DMV is going to say, download this wallet. I'm going to put an electronic version into your mobile device. So that's kind of the background, Jeff. And we got there because we're really interested in security and privacy and see this as a technology to enable that.
Yeah, there's definitely some good things along with that, and fraud prevention, and because you are you if you're able to
That's right.
display that and have the digital identity as well, and it's much more difficult to fake when you have something like that.
100%. Like, it's extremely easy to buy a fake driver's license, and it's probably a bit harder, but I'm sure I can get a fake passport as well. The advantage of the digital credentials is it is extremely hard to fake them because they're digitally signed. So let's say, from Utah. So Utah is going to be releasing a mobile driver's license. The actual DMV will sign this digital document that goes into your wallet, and that signature means that it can't be modified. You know who produced it. You even know whether it's been revoked or not. So if the DMV revokes your driver's license, when you go to present it, the verifier, that's what that's a term, or the relying party will be able to say, hey, hold on, that driver's license has been revoked. So there's even other capabilities like that. And the capability I said about only giving part of the data is what they call selective disclosure, which is if I've got a document with information on me, whether it's a passport, driver's license, my gym membership, whatever it is, and it might have a whole bunch of information, I only want to present the minimal information you need to deal with me. And so that's the big advantage of it. And you're right, it's going to prevent a lot of fraud because it's very much more difficult to fake those electronic driver's license, for example, than the plastic one.
And is that because it's stored on the blockchain? Is that where the digital signature is, and that's how they know it's authenticated because it calls back and says this is real?
Yeah, and so I'm glad you brought that up because I do feel that this is probably the best use case for blockchains or what they call ledgers that's out there. When we think about blockchains and ledgers, we're thinking about cryptocurrencies and people think about NFTs. But in this case, what it does is it provides what they call the trust layer for the environment. So it's not that your credential goes onto the blockchain. Your credential goes into your wallet. So it goes from the issuer, say the DMV, into your wallet, into your identity wallet, and then you present it to wherever you need to present it. You can present it when you're going to a bar, when you're picking up a rental car, whatever you need to present that driver's license. But how does the rental car agency know that this is a valid driver's license? Well, they need to be able to check the signatures. How do they do that? Well, that's where the blockchain comes in because the issuer puts its information onto the blockchain. So the issuer will say, I'm the Salt Lake City, the Utah DMV, this is my public key, this is my endpoint, all sorts of information they can put on there. And then the verifier, say it's that bar, they can go to that and retrieve that information in real time and then be able to verify that signature. So you're right that really the foundation of this system is that blockchain or ledger because it provides what they call an immutable record, right? Once it's been written by the DMV, no one can come and alter that. Like, the big problem of if you put a file on a file system is someone can go and change the file. And we're seeing that with crypto hacks and things like that. When it's on the blockchain and that public key is there, no one can change it. The DMV can add a new one, but you can still see the old one and the new one. It's immutable, and so it's really protected from hacking.
Yeah. So how does the pseudo platform enable users to have control over their own data and manage their privacy?
Yeah, so what the pseudo platform is, so as I said, when we started out building mobile apps and say, look, let's build apps for users, and we have an application called My Pseudo that, allows users to create different personas so they can take those personas online, and those personas can have different email addresses and phone numbers, and we do virtual credit cards and safe browsing around those personas. When we released that to the market, as I said, enterprises came to us and said, look, we'd really love to get those facilities, those capabilities into apps for our users. That's when we built the pseudo platform. And what it meant building the pseudo platform was, and pseudo became from personas or pseudonym. But the reason we built that platform is we wanted to have a whole set of services, right? And we have services like virtual credit cards and telephony and email, safe browsing, and a whole bunch of these different services. And we wanted to have them nicely packaged up. So you had services with nice APIs and SDKs, and then we'd have sample apps to show you how to use them so that any enterprise could come along and use our services. So that's the background. And then, as I said, decentralized identity is one part of that. And so we've been adding those capabilities, and it's mean things like, implementing an issuer so that we can issue credentials, creating a verifier service for verifying credentials. We have 3 different wallet solutions. So we have like an SDK if you want to add a wallet to your existing mobile app, or we've got a full mobile app, or we've even got a thing called an enterprise wallet, which is more of a cloud-based wallet. So the platform provides a bunch of these capabilities that can then be used in whatever project or with whatever enterprise we're trying to work with. So it's just part of it, but Anonyme, obviously provides a sort of a broad range of these services. Because as we know, like when we go online and try to be safe, you can't just deal with one thing. You need a VPN. Well, I also need a password manager, but I also don't want to give out my personal mobile phone number. So how about you give me a replacement number? And that's why we have telephony. Oh, but I don't want to use my personal email address, so I need to have an email address. So this is why we have these different capabilities, because you need a number of different arrows or whatever in the quill to be able to really protect yourself online. So that's why we built the platform with all these different services.
And that makes a lot of sense, because I think about just the way that I use it. I do have my personal email address, and friends and family have that.
Yes.
But then I have something else that I use specifically for shopping. I have another one that I use specifically for travel. And it would be nice to have all of those together and, just be able to go online one place and have that, that I like that, that is your pseudo. That is you online in that context.
Yeah,
I think that's really
that's why we actually came up with the My Pseudo app. So My Pseudo app is probably the best way to see that if anyone wants to have a look at what personas mean. Because, and I'll give you an example for me. So I do a fair bit of travel. I live in Australia. I just came back from the US and Europe, and I use my travel pseudo when I'm traveling. And that travel pseudo has a travel email address, a travel phone number, travel virtual credit card, and I give those out to all of the airlines, hotels, everyone that I'm dealing with. And then what it means is that that's kind of my persona while I'm traveling, and all the interactions, you get emails from the hotels or confirmation messages, things like that. They all go into my pseudos, into that pseudo or that persona, and all the information's together. So it's not only a way of saying that's how I travel online, that's my persona traveling online, but it all puts all that information together as well, which is quite good for sort of that management side. I can see everything while I'm traveling together. So that's the concept. And I have 9 pseudos myself, where I have things like, shopping, if I want to sell something. I've got things like, if I do donations, so I always use my donation pseudo. And as I said, I have my travel pseudo. I have one for like home projects. So if I'm dealing with a plumber or electrician, a carpenter, any of those sort of people, I use my home pseudo. So I guess it's good for managing, but the most important thing is it's about privacy. It's like, I don't want to give that plumber that I don't know my mobile phone number. I just don't want to do that.
Right.
Or my personal email address, exactly what you said. That's for family and friends. My mobile phone number and my personal email address, that's for my family and friends and no one else. And you deal with strangers all the time. So you need a way of kind of having that layer between you and them. Yeah, and that's the persona concept.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. It makes it much easier to do that. Having one place to go instead of having to manage that outside. And the way that I do it today, it's all the same me online. It's just a different email address. So it's not really, there's no privacy there. Everybody still has access to the same things. I still get served ads for all sorts of things. And that's true, whether it's shopping, whether it's Christmas time and I'm shopping for gifts for somebody else, or it's all the same data pool. That is just shared among.
And if you think about the data brokers, and there's the big ones, the Googles and the Facebooks and all the Metas, they're the big ones, and their whole business model is about knowing everything about you. I want to know 99% of Jeff's life. I want to know what he's doing, who he's interacting with, because that's the value for selling to advertisers. And there's a whole industry of data brokers around there everywhere you go. So I look at it as when you go and, just say you go online, I'll say, I want to go to a bike shop and I want to use a persona to, and I'll give them a virtual credit card and a persona email address and phone number. You're just putting a little bit of barrier there so they can collect that data and put in the pool, but it doesn't really link back to you. So it's sort of you're separating from yourself, and you're making that digital trail a little bit harder for them to create.
Yeah. Well, you've been doing this for a while, 10 years, 2014. Yes. How has Anonyome Labs grown and evolved over that time? And what are some key milestones in the development of the company?
Yeah, I look at it. Yeah, it's a really good question, Jeff, and I love listening to your podcast because every time I listen to one, I go, "Oh yeah, we did that. Yeah, we had that problem. We've had that. We still have that problem." Because we all know the story, right? It's like we had this idea we want to do online privacy and security, and there's five of us, right? And we're at about 130 people now. So there's five of us back then. And we go, how do we start? Well, let's put, what do people like? Well, they like mobile applications. So that's why we started there. And we kind of started to learn what it meant to put a mobile app out into, consumer land and what churn meant. As I said, I just listened to your episode, I think just this week on churn, and I went, oh, I recognize that, because the greatest thing you do is you spend all this money bringing people to the app, and then you just see, they come in the front door and then they go out the back door, right? So, there's all these learnings as you go along, and then how do you interact with the users to get their feedback to make sure you're getting product market fit for that. So we started, as I said, with these mobile apps, and then we went to building the platform. We said, okay, we're going to deal with these enterprises who want to put different, 3 or 4 of our capabilities into an application. We need to have a platform to make that easy. So we had to learn about what it meant to build a platform, and then interact with enterprises and learn how that side worked. And then, as we said, like, the technology is shifting all the time. So all of a sudden there's this decentralized identity. We need to learn that and do that. And we've been building product in that for about probably 2 or 3 years now. We have a pretty good set of products there. But again, you've got to take a new technology out to market. So there's all these things you learn along the way. And the thing I like about your podcast is that you've got different people coming on, and every time they talk about their problem and how they've tried to solve it, like I go, yeah, we've been through that over those last 10 years. And I said, when we're built from 5 people that sort of started in a single room, and now we've got, a lab in the US and another in Australia, and we're selling around the world. But it's been a journey of, learnings all the way along. And I'm sure all your listeners are in the same boat, right? They could all sit down and tell you all the 10 things that they did wrong. And, we've done all those as well.
Well, looking back, what are some of the things you look back and say, I wish I'd done that differently?
I think one of the things, and I listened to another podcast where they're talking about getting that feedback from users, and it was really good, kind of some points that were made. It was, when you put something out there, right, you can go and build all sorts of new features, right? But are they the right features? Well, the best way is to really understand your users and talk to them regularly. I think that's a really key learning. Whether you're working, with an enterprise and their users, or directly we have, B2C and B2B2C, I guess, is being able to get the feedback from the users, and bad feedback and more feedback is better than no feedback. One thing that I really resonated is, the idea that you're not getting much feedback at all, so they must be happy. Well, I'd rather be getting almost negative feedback back than no feedback, because at least you know what your users are thinking. And so I think that's a really important thing. You never can get to product market fit unless you've really understood your users and tried to work with them. And it can be down to, like, you're building the wrong features, but also even the way you implement the user interface. It has to be easy for them to use. Like, it has to be something that when they go to use it, it kind of feels natural to them, not something that they're fighting against the system. So there's a lot of those sort of learnings as well. I guess another learning, which I think is interesting around the platform, is, you talk about, we build platform services. So I think we have something like 15 different services that we provide out with SDKs and APIs and sample apps and all those things. One of the things that we did try, and it's probably about 4 or 5 years ago, is to go to this technology called serverless technology. Normally when you set up, you're building a service, I deploy, a Linux instance, and I write some code that sits on there, and you kind of have to manage that, even if you're using one of the cloud providers. Serverless is a pretty different way of thinking about it. It's just about, you don't really have any visibility of the hardware or the memory or anything like that. You just build services that run. And so we did quite a lot of work in serverless technology. So I'd say probably 80% of our services now are serverless. And what that means is you don't really need as many people to be looking after the environment, because, if you think about the old days of, I've got 20 systems that I've got to look after. I've got to patch them, make the security patches done. I've got to make sure that I'm updating everything. And you basically got to care and feed this environment all the time. When you go to serverless, in some ways, you're handing a lot of that over to the cloud provider. So I think that's another learning for us, is if you can use serverless rather than the server-based technology, then I think you really reduce that ongoing maintenance cost. So these are other learnings that we've had. And I could go more and more of different things that we've learned over the years. But It's in the journey, and everybody has to go through this learning cycle, don't they?
Ready to future-proof your company and scale to new heights? Dive into the ultimate resource designed for SaaS founders and C-suite executives. Champion Leadership Group gives you an unfair advantage in scaling up revenue and outwitting competitors. Imagine solving your biggest scaling headaches and hitting 5, 10, 20 million ARR and beyond with ease. Now, we take away the guesswork and the grunt work and replace it with framework by supporting you with our on-demand fractional C-suite team, a powerful operating system built into software, and a thriving community of fellow scaling founders. That's how we make it happen. If you're stuck at your current revenue level, this is your ticket out. If you feel like your company is the world's best kept secret, we amplify your success. And hey, if you're already crushing it, but too busy to breathe, we got you. We'll free up 20% of your time in the first month and you come hang out and feed you with us. Now is the time to upgrade from traction to scale. If you're ready to work smarter and not just grind harder, schedule a 10-minute growth brainstorm. It's free, not a sales call, and we will pinpoint the number one thing blocking revenue. Visit championleadership.com, where leaders evolve and companies transform. So what motivated Anonyome Labs to expand from individual privacy to enterprise? That's a pretty big leap, which I think is really smart. And then how did that shift the impact of the company's growth?
Yeah, it's completely different, right? It is completely different when you've got a B2C model. So we have this app called MySudo, and we have a VPN that goes alongside it. We have another one called Reclaim, and these are what we call our B2C apps. So it's us directly out to the market. We're putting them in the app store. We have browser extensions and desktop and all that, and that's one side of things. And it's about subscription ARR, right? It's about I need to get users on, I need them to subscribe, and I can't let them churn if I can. I need to bring more on, and I need them to stick, right? And that's kind of one model. When you're working with an enterprise, it's completely different. It is completely different, and sometimes I think you like, should we be doing both? Because they are quite different. When you're working with an enterprise, all of a sudden they go, okay, you want to work with us? Like, you need to go through this security evaluation. We need to understand your secure development life cycle. We want to understand how you're building things. We want to make sure the company is, liquid and all those sort of things. And then you eventually get to a point to say, yeah, we want to work with you. And then you start to build apps with them, and they start to provide things out to their users. So we've got a number of enterprises where they're providing applications out to their users that either they've built or we've helped them build. And it's a totally different model. And one of the big differences is the users are really at arm's length, because in a lot of cases, their end users that we're providing technology to, they're using that enterprise's support, and they've got the kind of that interaction. So all of a sudden, we've got users that are a little bit more arm's length from us. So how do we get feedback from those users? It's much more difficult. Maybe we've got to talk to the enterprise's support people. So that's one of the big key differences. But it's a kind of a different model. Like, when you're working with an enterprise, you're signing multi-year agreements with them, and you've got capabilities you've got to put out, and there's SLAs and all these things that you have with an enterprise that you don't have when you're just putting out to customers. So it's quite different. And half the time I think it's good, and the other half the time I think it's bad. It's like, should we just be focusing on B2B2C, or should we just be focusing on B2C? When you've got both, it's kind of an interesting mix, because you're trying to provide essentially the same capabilities in two different models, but the way they operate is very, very different.
As the way you manage them, like, do they have different metrics? Do you look at them differently in the way that you think about growth and strategically approach them?
Yeah, it is quite different. So when you're dealing with enterprises and trying to bring new enterprise on, it's more like a sales model, right? It's more like a traditional sales model when you're working with a large enterprise is, okay, I want to go and work with a new enterprise. And it might be, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months of interacting with a large enterprise to get there, right? And so I would say it's more of like a traditional sales model. Whereas when you're working to B2C, right, all you've got is your product and maybe your marketing team. And so it's a completely different model to get growth. And as I said, in both, I would say in both situations though, and this is why I really resonated with recent podcasts that you had around churn, is in both models, the killer of your ARR and your subscribers is just this churn. If you can reduce that churn by 5%, it makes such a huge difference to the growth the growth of that subscription base. So I think there's similarities and there's differences. Maybe the way you approach it and the way you do sales is different. But at the end of the day, you need to have a good product that the end user feels useful and they want to use and they want to stick with, because that's where your success is. So I think, there's overlap and similarities, and then there's differences of maybe the sales approach.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, the industry that you're in, data privacy is, certainly there's a lot of regulation around that. You're working around the world, lots of different jurisdictions, standards groups, and you're involved in a number of those standards groups. So how does that influence your approach to managing personal data privacy and security, and kind of shaping what the future looks like?
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. And I'll give you some sort of background around what's happening around decentralized identity. If you have a look at it, it's a technology that really is growing up in the standards groups. So you talk about, there's a Decentralized Identity Foundation, it's a standards group. There's one called W3C. There's IETF. There's OpenID Foundation. There's Trust Over IP. There's the Linux Foundation. So there's up to about 10 of these different organizations that are working in developing this technology, and they might be, there's 3 or 4 different credential standards. There's maybe 3 or 4 different credential exchange standards. There's standards around wallets. There's standards around issuers and verifiers, and all the parts that make up that system. And so from us, we're involved in probably about half a dozen different groups. It's even with our size company, it's hard to be involved with everything. There's a lot, but you've at least got to follow what's going on with them. But we're probably involved in about 6 pretty closely, meaning we're membership of groups or we're helping to run groups in there. And some of it is just awareness, right? I need to know what's happening with this standard, whether we're going to have to implement it, whether we think it's going to be successful. As things are changing over time, okay, we've built this, but actually now the standard is this, we need to go and build this. So I think being involved in the standards group has been really important for us, but it does take commitment. You've got to have people who are every day getting on calls with different groups and working through them. So it's a big commitment from the company to be involved with standards, but you really need to understand them. And a good example is the European Union is really going very big in terms of decentralized identity. So they've got this legislation called IDAS, right? And what it means is, I'll give you some of the implications. Every country in Europe must produce an identity wallet, right? Their own identity wallet. So there's a whole bunch of projects in Europe around each of those countries, like Germany, France, Italy, that they're going through evaluations of what the German wallet's going to be, what the French wallet's going to be, what the Italy. So the legislation in Europe says everyone must produce a wallet. Following that, every country must produce a national ID credential as kind of a starting point. So you get that into your wallet, and then you can use it to go and get your driver's license and your passport, and then you'll end up with maybe a few dozen different credentials over time. But we're seeing the European Union really drive that, and they're driving it through the standards, and they even say in their documents, this is the credential exchange program. This is the credential that you must use and be able to support. So we've got to understand that, and that's one of the reasons why I actually just came back from Berlin. So I came back from a conference called European Identity and Cloud Conference, and probably about 50% of that conference was about decentralized identity. But it's the only way that I thought, well, I've got to keep in touch with what's happening in Europe, and it's really eye-opening how much is happening there. But you've got to understand it, and you think, well, how does it impact my Australian project or my US project, and those kind of things as well. Like, you have to kind of think about these things. So that's why it isn't, this business is international, because different parts of the world are at different points in the cycle, and you've really got to kind of understand it all. And it's not easy to do. It's definitely not easy.
I guess that's really one of my next questions, is just about interoperability. If you've got all of these different countries doing their own thing, building their own wallets, are they going to work together? Or is there a centralized standard, kind of like passports, where
it's a great question.
They'll kind of work together.
And that is the purpose of the standards groups. But to be honest, where we are in decentralized identity is, someone said to me, the beauty of standards is there's so many of them, right? And so the mobile driver's license is a standard, and it's a standard that talks about an issuer and how they issue it, like a DMV issues it into the wallet, what the credential format is, how you present it to a verifier relying party. And that in itself is a real end-to-end standard. It's in ISO. And this is why, I said like about half the states in the US will have MDL, digital driver's license, by the end of the year. Probably the rest of them will come the year after. And I have one in Australia. I have an MDL driver's license. So that's an example of where it is worldwide. Like everybody's around the world who's doing digital driver's licenses following this ISO standard. And that's great because it means I could present my Australian driver's license to a verifier in the US, for example, because they're all interoperable. I wish it was as simple as that. But once you go outside of mobile driver's license, you start to get a whole range of different credentials and things. So OpenID Foundation has a credential exchange for protocol, which is about how you go from verifier to issuer to wallet and wallet to verifier. But there's 2 or 3 other varieties as well. There's at least 4 different credential types. There's ones called anonymous credentials. W3C has a credential. There's one called SDJWT is another credential, and there's these. And the reason why there's these different credential types is we've learned from the first set of credentials to make the second one better, and then the third one gets better again. And so we're learning as we go along about what a really good credential is. So I would say at the moment, outside of the mobile driver's license, the rest of the world is still kind of trying to find its feet about what's the right credential format and the credential exchange protocols and stuff. So I'd say in the case, and so what does it mean for Anonyome? Well, it means that we be a bit agnostic, right? And we say, okay, we'll support 3 or 4 different credential types, 3 or 4 exchange protocols and that. So if we're on a project where they say, well, it's got to be a W3C credential, we'll be able to support that. If we're on another project that says you need to use what's called OpenID for VC credential exchange, we'll support that as well. So for a software provider like us, it's complex, right? We've got to understand multiple different protocols and credential types and things like that. But it means that we can work, as you said, like work in Europe, work in US, et cetera, and they all have different requirements. So I guess the answer is outside of the mobile driver's license, there's a variety of options you can use, and depending on the project, what you might want to use.
That seemed to be a real advantage, to really be in the early stage of this and developing it over time, because you're adding standards, and then it really kind of builds a moat around the business. I would think if somebody new wants to come in, now they have to adopt 30 different standards from the beginning, where you've been adding them incrementally along as they're developed.
Yeah,
do you see it that way, or
I think there is some truth to that. I think there's a number of companies like Anonyome who have been in it for quite a while and have seen the development from the start all the way through, and have been evolving with that, and we've certainly been doing that. So I agree. Like one of the things that's kind of interesting in the identity and access management space, and there's stacks of companies in that space, most of them haven't actually moved across to decentralized identity. They're still in that kind of centralized or federated mode. So they will have that exact issue, which is, okay, these other companies like Anonyome have been doing this for 2, 3, 4 years. Now we've got to try to get in there. How do we catch up? And it's even just the knowledge, how do they understand the industry and what's happened and all of that. So not only is there, I've got to build products, with speed if I'm one of these providers coming in late, but I've just got to understand it all. And it's only because, for example, I've been in it for all these years that I sort of understand why this is happening over here and why this is happening here and why we should focus on this and not on this. And I think that's something, if you come in late, it's going to be more difficult to do.
Well, you have been doing this for a long time, 30 years experience, software product development, security. I mean, that's an eternity in software years. What is the most significant change you've seen in security, privacy, and identity in that time?
And it's changed drastically over that time. I mean, we've seen, I did a PhD back in the 90s, and I finished kind of late 90s, and I did in information security, and that's how I got into the kind of that security, privacy, identity industry, and I've been there all the time. Like, I've never swapped into anything else. I stayed in that space. So I've seen it develop over those years. And if we look at something like cybersecurity, I mean, it's just been a continuous evolution there, because it's almost like a war game, right? Someone comes up with a way of, infiltrating an organization, then a protection's put in place, and then the next one's come along, and I've seen that go with cybersecurity for the last 30 years is you just get to the point where you feel like it's protected, and then the next attack comes out. And for a good example now, AI, look at what's happening with AI, deep fakes around voice and video and all those ways of identifying. It was kind of interesting. I went through this government authentication process here in Australia, and it was only like 6 months ago, and they're going, we're replacing it with voice authentication. I'm like, you're too late. The AI can already impersonate my voice, so it's not a
They
good
can already
authentication
impersonate it.
technology. So that's an example where they've gone, oh, look, we want to move away from password. And so when you call in, we're going to use your voice to authenticate you. And I thought, well, that was good until AI came along. So I think that's the story of cybersecurity. Privacy is I think it's a little bit different. Like privacy is about really using your personal data in a way that you've never approved of and never agreed upon, and exploiting that data. And what I've seen there is the situation's got much worse over the last 30 years. If you look about it now, how do you go online? And this is why we try to produce this technology, is how do you go online and be safe and not have all of your data, following you around everywhere and creating this digital trail and all that. And cybersecurity is one side of it, but privacy is different, and it's about protecting what you're doing and keeping it private to yourself, and so that not everyone knows about it. And so there is this pendulum that's kind of swung across to the data brokers, and we're trying hard to swing it back, and that decentralized identity is one technology is helping to try to swing it back. But there's definitely been a swing of the pendulum from you owning your data to it being within data brokers, and now we're really trying to pull that pendulum back so that you can get back to being more private and secure. And so I've seen this go for this 30 years, and it doesn't stop, right? Technology changes, it improves, and all these things happen. But it's just the ground then moves again, and then you've got to understand that. So that's what's happened over the last 30 years. We haven't got to a place where we go, it's all solved now. There's still a lot of work to do, and decentralization, I think, is a really key part of that. And a lot of people, when they say, oh, what does it mean, decentralized identity, or what does decentralization mean? Let me give you an example of a project we were working on, right? So sure. This is a farming project, and you think, wow, farming, why is Paul working on a farming project? Well, they've got data, they've got privacy and all the same things. So there was this project where it's a regulated industry. Well, farmers have to present to local government and federal government and things like what fertilizer have I used? Am I organically certified? There's a bunch of things that farmers have to do, and miners have to do the same thing in these regulated industries. And so when they were trying to build this system, and this was about 4 years ago, they said, we've got two models, right? There was one consortium put a model up with Centralized, which is, okay, let's just get the farmers. We'll create a big database in the government, and we'll get the farmers to put all their data in there. Things like what's their farm, what are they growing, what's their geospatial, what fertilizer they're using, all of these things about themselves that they've got certified, and go and put it up in a database. And we'll get all the farmers to do that, and all the people who need access to the data go in and access that data. And that's the centralized model that we're really used to. And we know what happens when that happens. Unauthorized access, data gets stolen, all of those bad things. So they actually, and I think this is quite innovative, is they said, no, we're going to go through a decentralized approach. And it's like, what does that mean? Well, it means there's no big database. It means that if a farmer wants to get organically certified, they provide the information to the certifier. They give them a verifiable credential to say they're certified. And then if they're talking to the wholesaler, they present that verifiable credential that proves that they're organically certified.
Thanks again, Paul, for coming on the show and sharing your journey and insights. You can learn more about Paul and Anonyome Labs at anonymelabs.com. And as always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And be sure to check us out on YouTube as well. Full video episodes, you can see what life is like here in Fiji. And of course, we have training, shorts, videos, outtakes, all sorts of things over there. It's at Champion Leadership. It's our channel on YouTube. Thought leaders share. I bet you're one of those. Share this episode with someone who has never been to Fiji, or maybe share it with those who have. Everyone who shares this week gets a pair of musical island sandals. These are no ordinary flip-flops. They play an island-themed welcome song that plays everywhere you walk. So, moolah. Well, join us Thursday on our SaaS Fuel Expert Series, where my guest is Greg Brooks, partner at Search Tides, a hub for all things social SEO and the AI era of searching online. If you want insights about what the future of being found online looks like, you won't want to miss this one. And then next Tuesday, we have founder Rod Moynihan, 20 plus year SaaS veteran, who's led and scaled tech businesses across APAC, Australia, New Zealand, now serving on multiple SaaS boards and driving growth with a focus on aligning people, technology, and strategy. So I will see you next time, and as always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/saasfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.
Let's go!